just start and show how finalRender, the new version, handles image-based lighting and how it's done and how easy it is in finalRender to achieve fast and efficient illumination results. So the first thing I'm going to do here in 3D Studio Max is I will import an asset I found on the internet. So I will just drag and drop a file in here. I got this file from the internet. It uses a different renderer, but that doesn't matter with finalRender because we have a scene converter. So you can use all the assets that are out there on the internet. You can change the scene to a really highly optimized finalRender scene. So I got this file from the Viz people, and I just imported the mesh here. And what I'm going to do now is, because it uses a different renderer, I'm just going to click here, convert scene. And with convert scene, you can see instantly the scene is converted into a finalRender scene. So now we can just use the model as is. I will discuss a little bit about the materials in the model because the materials, the scene converter can only convert what it gets, so it can't create magic new amazing materials for you. So especially what you grab on the internet or get from the internet, sometimes the materials are really set up in strange ways. The reason for it is it's an old version of a renderer, or the person just wanted it to do it that way. So there's some strange things going on. We will discuss this later. So I imported this model, I converted the scene now, and the next thing we want to do with image-based lighting is just make sure that we use an HDRI image to act as our light. So if I were to render this scene right now, I'll turn on global illumination because later for our image-based lighting we need that. We can see the conversion took place. We have finalRender now, and we can just render the scene here. And we see, okay, the car looks like this. And the next thing we want to do is get our illumination going. So I'm going to the environment and effects dialog. And there, I'm just going to add as a background image an HDRI image. So I'm using the standard bitmap exporter. Keep this in mind. If you are working with HDRI images, we no longer have our own HDRI loader because it just doesn't make sense. It messes up things. It's too complicated. Just use what Max has. Learn what Max has. It's powerful enough. It gives all the information you need. So you would just load the HDR file. We are using this HDR file I got from the internet as well. There's a lot of HDR files on the internet, and we will discuss that this is sometimes not really good, or you have to know what's going on or how these files are working. But for now, I'm going to pick these this file here. It has a sun, a road, and that's it. So that should be fine enough. Then make sure that you're using the real pixel option so that we get all the pixel information, the intensities we need in this rendering. Now you would think, okay, that's it. I have GI on, I have my background image, so it should be fine. What's happening right now is, yes, we see something, but all you see right now is the reflections. So all you see here is the reflections and not the illumination. And what we are going to do is, so that we can adjust a little bit our viewport and where we are looking at and how everything is going or working, we're just going to get a nice view and then adjust our object, zoom in and out, and so on. And the first important thing you want to make sure is you create a camera, because as you've seen, I just imported the object, created it, and that's it. So we had no camera in the scene. I'm going to create a camera right now out of this perspective view. just by pressing Control C. That will create us a physical camera. And now we have a physical camera up here. So all I can do or work here is now with the actual camera options. And then we can make sure that we adjust our view a little bit like it was in the original image. So we can just play around a little bit how we want to place the car and where we want to place the car. Then we can move a little back. So I like to move around the camera. However, usually you would fix your camera and move the object around, scale it down, whatever you want. But for now, I'm going with that. And when we are ready here, I said we manage the environment, or the background is now there. So if we render here, we get kind of a cool, nice looking effect here, but we have no light or things going on here. So what we want to do is we want to add something that creates the actual light or illumination in that scene. And what you would do is you would just use a standard skylight in 3D Studio Max. And believe it or not, there is a skylight in 3D Studio Max that you can just use, and finalRender supports it. So there's no issue at all. finalRender is fully integrated into the workflow of 3D Studio Max. So you can just pick the skylight, use the skylight. So there is no extra object, no extra light or anything extra you need to learn. Just use the Max skylight. And with the Max skylight, we get the illumination now going. If I would just leave it as is, we would just get this sky color, this white sky color, or with a little bit of blue in there. We can render this as well if we want. So you see now we have the illumination going on. However, what we don't have right now is something that catches the shadow. So we would like to have a shadow down here. So in my live stream I did yesterday, I talked about the matte shadow material, and we're going to use that now to just have a shadow catcher here. But before we do that, I want to make sure that I use the same image I have in the background. Let me just grab again the background. So I'll drag and drop the image in here, make sure it's an instance so they're connected. So I want to make sure that for the actual illumination of my sky, I use the same texture, the HDRI texture. So what we have now created is the illumination comes from the surrounding now, from our actual photograph or image, HDR image. And if we wanted, we can render this as well. We can check how this looks like. So a slight change, we can go back. As you can see, this was the sky with the solid color, and I'll change to that. And this was without the sky. And this is how we started our rendering. So you can see now we get the nice surrounding illumination and reflection and everything going on here. Still missing is our shadow. So the first thing I'll do, I'll create a shadow catcher object. And for that, we are just using a good old plane. So I'm putting a plane underneath the car. And this plane, I'll assign a special material. As I said, I did a live stream yesterday explaining the finalRender matte shadow object material. Check out the stream. It explains in detail what you can do with it. It's amazing. It's really easy. It's simple to set up, and you will see in an instant that it's just drop it on the object. We have it on the plane now. We don't need to adjust anything or do anything right now. And we can just go in there and render the scene. And then we should see a shadow underneath the car. which makes it much more integrated into our image here right now, into our rendering. So now what we have is the various shadows. And let me just say, I'm pressing rendering all the time so that I get my render history here. And we could also use our amazing Activeshade here. But keep in mind our Activeshade, come on, Max. Ah, okay, here we are. So I'm switching to Activeshade now. Choose finalRender as our Activeshade renderer. Make sure we have global illumination turned on. Okay, that's the case. And then we can use our Activeshade renderer and see instantly when we do changes to the illumination, to the materials and everything. However, we have to be careful now, and I will explain it. I'm not using Activeshade for adjusting the HDRI files because there's a little strange problem with 3D Studio Max and updates. So it will update in an endless loop. It will kill us if we are overdoing it. So that's why I just press render. But for now, if we are just adjusting materials, or I want to show the materials and what we can do, we can use Activeshade in interactive mode. So I'll turn off the receive shadows. As you can see, it didn't do a lot. It didn't do really anything at all. I can turn off the ambient occlusion, which is the contact shadows or the close by shadows of the object. And I can turn that on again. And you will see when it updates, we get the ambient occlusion shadow here. But when I do the same with the receive shadow, there's nothing happening. We have no shadow. And from the image, we can see there should be some shadow here. So why is that? Why don't we get shadow with our image-based lighting? Because that's all about what we want. We want one sphere around our scene with the sun in there, or with multiple lights, doesn't matter. And this should be our illumination. I don't want to plant lights and fake anything. That's the reason I want to do image-based lighting. My image should be the light. So why don't I see a shadow right now? And this is because the HDRI files you can get out there, they're of various quality out there. Everyone says he is creating the best HDRI files, but it's not true. Not everyone is creating the best HDRI files for computer graphics or illumination purposes. So why isn't this working? Because in theory, if we have a look at these HDRI file, it should work pretty well. There is this bright spot, the sun. So our system should detect where the sun is. We have the sky. So there's nothing multiple or strange going on. It should work just fine. The main issue is you need to check, or to understand what's going on, is check the actual values of your HDRI light sources in the image. So when we look here, we get values around 20, 30 sometimes, and then most of the time it's 1, 2. So it's about 3 times above a white value of a normal RGB value. So now when we look in comparison to the surrounding here, we are around 1 when we take the blue, 1.2 intensity. So, or here's even in this area 1.4. So that means there's not a lot of difference. And when you think about it, that's an issue, because in reality, you can't look at the sun, at least not for long, or you get blind. So if you want to try, do it. But the sun is really bright. And believe me, sun is bright. And so is the sky. The sky is also bright. So what's wrong here? The problem is that HDRI files have a limited, even much wider range of values, but they have a still a limited range of values. And depending how the person created the HDR file, how many levels he created, how many stops and so on, it might be just a small difference between the sun and the sky. And this is what we see here. So the difference is not actually there to really create a strong light or shadow in this case. So how can you solve that? Because you don't want to do your own HDRI file. It's a messy process, takes some time and so on. And if you need this background, or you got it and you have to live with it, there's one trick that is done and used very often in various other renders as well, and it's the same for finalRender. It also works with finalRender. But before we do that, as I told you, we have this little issue going on right now with HDR files and updates sending and in infinite loops. I'm going back to our production render. So what I'm going to do is to fix this shadow issue. I'm going to just go in there and grab the bitmap, the material, sorry, and duplicate the material into a new slot. And we just name that so that we can recognize it as illumination. So that means I will use that for the illumination only and not for the background. So now we are doing something really not nice, or a little bit more complex. You can't work with one HDRI because our HDRI doesn't work as good for our illumination purpose. So we are now separating it. We have one for the background, and now we're using one for the illumination. So as I said, we don't have enough difference, enough variations in there. Our sun is way too low in brightness or intensity. So what I'm going to do is I'm using our finalRender color correct, which is an amazing material. It gives you all the control you need to adjust any bitmap you might have. So we're keeping the old one as submap. And I'm not going very deep into the finalRender color correct material. I will do an extra live stream for this material alone because it's really powerful and you can do a lot of things with it. But what we wanted is we want to increase the brights and we want to decrease the non-bright areas. So actually we want to stretch the difference between both values, so that the sun gets brighter and the sky gets darker, so that we get back our natural, this is bright, this is darker. And I'm just, because I'm lazy, I'm just going to do that with one setting. I'm going to use the gamma value of 0.5. And we can see here it already changed it. So I'm going to use this in our skylight. So I'm selecting the skylight again, and drag and drop it into our skylight. So I'm overwriting now our background material. I created this new one, and now I have two separate HDRI files. I have one HDRI for the background, which I really do not need to use anymore. And I have the important one, the HDRI file for the illumination. So I've assigned that, and now when we render, we should see a much more defined and darker and sharper shadow. You've seen the sampling sky, and now you can see we have the shadow we expect from the HDRI file. We could adjust, or can adjust now, how strong we want to have it, how much we want to do that. So we could set it to 0.75, for example, if we don't want to have it too extreme. So the sampling sky pass is analyzing the HDRI file. It's looking for the light sources. It's doing this pre-processing. So with 0.75, we barely get our shadow. So I was pretty good with my 0.5, and I'm happy with my 0.5 value here. So now that I have separated the background image and the illumination HDRI, I could also use a different background file, a much better background file, for example. And because the background doesn't contribute to the illumination anyway, it only contributes for the reflection, we can just go ahead and use a high resolution. There was one high resolution image here, 8K. So there's a really high resolution image of the same shot. I'm using this high resolution image for the background, and I'm going to render now, and then we are going to see in our history what difference it makes. So by splitting up and separating the illumination from the actual viewport, or what you see through your camera, you can achieve really nice results. And here's the difference between those two. The only thing I changed is the background image to a high resolution spherical image or environment image. And here's the low resolution, very low resolution, or not really low resolution. I think it's 2K. But for illumination, it's all fine. We get the spot for the light and illumination, so all looks nice and crisp. Now you can see the asphalt really nice, and you can see the object in the distance. So that's usually the way you have to work with when the HDRI file is not really made for illuminating your scene. It's just an image with some values higher than 1.0. The question is, are there any other HDRI files out there that would work? And let's just have a look and see if this is the case. I found another web page, HDR Haven, and this HDRI Haven, they have pretty good HDRI files for illumination. So the group or person who created these HDRI files, he had in mind illumination in computer graphics. So those are working much, much better. So I'm using kind of similar HDRI file. So we have blue sky, no clouds, nothing, a street or road. And I'm using that in 2K only. I didn't download the 4 or 16K. You can download it in 16Ks from their side. But let's just try this image. And what I'm doing now is I'm using the same image in the Skylight. So what I'm doing is I'm now having only one image. So this image actually is gone. I can scrap that. I'm now having only one image for background and illumination. So, and what I'm doing here again is adjusting the viewport a little bit, because let's just have a look here and move around here. Okay, that's good. And let's just move it. Oops. No, I moved the power body. Let's just move the camera a little back and something like that. Who cares? Let's have it like that. So as I said, now we have one image. No tricks with color correct or changing the contrast of the image. And let's just render this image as we have it here. It's now sampling the HDRI file to look for the lights, and we see we already get the shadows there. So with this HDRI file, the shadow is no more an issue. And this is because this HDRI image, as I said, it's similar to the one we had before. So both are saying they are HDRI, and they are HDRI files. But in this HDRI file, we have much, much higher values. You can see 900 for the sun, 900, and even 2,200. So this I would qualify 3,000. This I would qualify as an HDRI image. The one we had before, yes, fine, it's a value above 1, but it didn't make sense for illumination in computer-generated stuff. So this image works right out of the box. So just one file, put it in the background, put it in your Skylight, render, and you're done. You get your illumination here. So that's actually how easy it is to use finalRender and image-based lighting. There's not much else I'm going to show you about the image-based lighting here, because there isn't really anything to do, except if you wanted to adjust the sky part or the global illumination part of your light. We do support the daylight, as I mentioned. So if you think it's too bright, you can dial it down with this multiplier here. And we would just render again. And you will see that now our illumination part is much, much darker to the one compared from before. So with these multipliers, here you can see it in the shadows much, much better. Maybe I should. Yeah, it's also inside. So, or if you wanted to increase it, let me increase it to maybe 20 and we'll render again. So we support this. So if you wanted to do some slight adjustments between the illumination and the background image, you can do that still with the Skylight multipliers. So here we see all that is using actually a diffuse part is getting really bright, and the reflection part is a combination of the illumination and reflection. So talking about the material, let's have a look at the material. I told you that we also go and have a look with the material. Let me just put that back to 1, and we are now looking into the material. As I said, our scene converter did a great job in recreating the original materials and original scene. So with the original material and original scene, we have our car body material looking like this. The interesting part is when we now try to explore, we have an FR layer material in here. So they had in their original rendering setup, as I said, this was not done for finalRender, layered materials. We support that. We convert it as is. If it makes sense or not, we don't know. The converter can't know. It converts the scenes. So, but what we have here is a layered material, a blend material, all in combination, and it works. That's the amazing part. We are a GPU renderer. We support the layer material. We support the blend material. We support the composite material. All these fancy materials that other GPU renderers just don't support. There's no layers, or there's only one layer, or maybe 2 materials, and all this. finalRender is very good in supporting this, and we're using here GPU and CPU at the same time. So this is our car material, and we can see they're using here a mix in the glossy as well, and they're using a metal texture map that's meant for the DeLorean aluminum stuff they have here. So a pretty complex material setup for the car body. As I don't like this kind of car model material, finalRender comes with a really advanced car paint material, and that allows you to create car paint really just by assigning it, and you're done. So you just get this nice dedicated car paint material, and you can work with that. So because we are now going to work a little bit, just a little bit, I won't overdo it here in this session, just a little bit with the materials, I go back to our Activeshade, because that's the idea of the material. The Activeshades that we can adjust interactively the materials. So when our HDRI scanning is done, we will get our car in here. So as we can see, we have our car paint now here. Our car paint is really special. It allows you to do a lot of nice things, but I'm just going to really fast because this was not about the KEYPOINT, but just so that you know, when you adjusted your image-based lighting, you can just hop into and dive into your material setup. So let me just choose this one and make this one a little bit darker. So now we have our material here. We can zoom a little bit closer here so that we have. And the great thing is this material has a coating layer. So it works like you would expect from a KEYPOINT material. It handles coating and reflections in two separate layers. So the highly specular coating above and a more diffuse below. So that's how it's set up right now. But we can also control how much the coating layer or the lower layer will contribute to the overall effect. So I'm now increasing our coating layer so that it contributes much more. So the reflection of the coating layer will be much, much stronger now. So we see our environment or reflection here much better. And I could also increase the other layer and reduce the glossiness. So, and if I wanted, the reflections right now are really strong and crisp and clean in here. Just move around here. So if we wanted to make them just a little bit more blurry, I would just go and dial in here a blurry amount, and we have blurry reflections, right? So as you can see, it's really nice. And I didn't create any single light in the scene. The only light in the scene is our image, and it's one image right now. So we didn't have to do the dance background image, foreground image, or illumination image. So I only use the skylight. That's all. That's my only source of light. And it detected the sun, so you don't have to do special maps or anything special to the HDR. Just throw it in and you will get your image-based lighting set up and done in an instant here. So that's it about this stream or explanation about image-based lighting, how you set it up in finalRender. Let me just summarize what I did here so that when you want to try, we have a finalRender trial version. You can download it from our webpage and you can try it on your own. The model is free. The HDRI files are free. I got the DeLorean model from the Viz people. You can Google it. You'll find it. HDRI files are out there. Just keep in mind what I explained in this video. Make sure the HDRI is good for illumination for artificial scenes or computer-generated scenes. And then you can try out everything you saw here, and you can test your hardware even with GPU and CPU rendering as well. So what I did is I just used one image here. I used it as a background image. Make sure when you use it as a background image that it is set to spherical environment so that we have a sphere. And the HDRI should be also a spherical image. So that will illuminate or show everything. So you see a floor and you see a sky. Just make sure you have it set to spherical. And then the next step is to actually, that won't give you the illumination. That just gives you the background image. So the illumination comes from the Skylight, the standard 3D Studio Max Skylight. I'll show you because not many people even know that there is a light standard Skylight option. Just use the standard Skylight. We support it. It works like a charm, as you've seen here. Okay, that's it for today, and thanks for watching my stream, and I hope you check out our next stream. We will talk about materials, and hope to see you soon. Thanks.